They thought they could control the headlines forever. They thought every failed deal could be hidden behind a glamorous photo, every broken relationship could be explained away, every uncomfortable question could be buried beneath another carefully crafted public appearance. But what happens when the people who once protected you start walking away? What happens when the shield disappears? Because according to explosive claims now making waves across Hollywood and royal circles, the real crisis facing Meghan Markle is not one bad headline, one failed project, or one angry critic. It is something much bigger. It is the collapse of the system that allegedly kept those headlines from ever appearing in the first place. The image that keeps haunting this entire story is almost impossible to ignore. A wheelchair basketball match during the 2025 Invictus Games. Harry's signature project. The event meant to showcase purpose, leadership, and global influence beyond royal life. Yet reports claim only 43 paying spectators attended. 43. Let that number sink in. A venue capable of holding thousands. Athletes who sacrifices command respect. Veterans who overcame extraordinary hardships just to compete. And somehow, only 43 people reportedly purchased tickets. Then came the allegation that approximately 100 additional individuals were brought in and positioned around Harry and Meghan for photographs. Suddenly, the cameras saw crowds. Suddenly, the pictures looked fuller. Suddenly, the optics improved. But if those reports are true, what does that tell us? Was the audience real, or was the appearance of an audience the real objective? Because the difference between public support and stage support is enormous. One reflects influence, the other reflects desperation. And that is where investigative biographer Tom Bower enters the picture. In March 2026, he released another major investigation focused on Harry and Meghan. Not a collection of random rumors, not anonymous social media gossip. A book packed with names, timelines, claims, and allegations that immediately triggered a public response from the Sussex camp. And that response may be one of the most revealing parts of the entire story. Why? Because instead of focusing on specific facts, specific dates, or specific claims, the criticism centered on attacking the book itself. That reaction instantly raised eyebrows. If a story is completely harmless, why react so strongly? Why elevate it? Why bring even more attention to it? The result was immediate. The controversy exploded. The book climbed the charts. And suddenly, people who never intended to read it were asking one question: what exactly is inside these pages that caused such a reaction? That question leads directly to one of the most fascinating allegations in the entire investigation: the existence of what some insiders allegedly describe as a protective shield around Meghan Markle. Not a literal shield, but something potentially even more powerful. Influence, connections, access, the kind of protection that exists when one of Hollywood's most powerful agencies stands between you and negative publicity. In April 2023, Meghan signed with William Morris Endeavor, one of the biggest talent agencies in the entertainment industry. This was supposed to be a major turning point, a powerful partnership, a fresh start. But according to multiple claims cited by Bower, the relationship allegedly began to deteriorate behind the scenes far sooner than the public realized. The timeline becomes particularly intriguing around late 2023 and early 2024. Reports suggest frustrations were growing. Expectations were allegedly clashing with reality. Meetings were held. Discussions took place. And then, according to insiders quoted in the investigation, something changed dramatically. Publicly, everything looked normal. Privately, allegedly not. That contradiction sits at the center of this mystery. Because while official appearances continued, claims emerged that active efforts behind the scenes had significantly cooled. If true, it would mean the public image and the private reality were moving in completely different directions. The representation remained visible on paper, yet questions began swirling about what was actually happening behind closed doors. And here is where the story becomes even more explosive. Some Hollywood insiders allegedly believe that many of the negative stories that emerged later would never have appeared if the agency had still been actively operating at full strength on Meghan's behalf. Think about that for a moment. If true, that means the real turning point was not a failed business venture, not a controversial interview, not a disappointing project. The real turning point was the moment the protection allegedly weakened. Suddenly, stories started appearing. Questions multiplied. Reports about business struggles surfaced. Discussions about staff departures intensified. Narratives that once seemed impossible to publish were suddenly everywhere. Coincidence? Maybe, or maybe something much larger was unfolding beneath the surface. Because the deeper investigators looked, the more one pattern seemed to emerge. Relationships beginning with excitement. Partnerships starting with enormous promise. Powerful allies entering the picture with enthusiasm. Then, quietly, almost mysteriously, many of those same relationships appearing to fade, fracture, or disappear altogether. But the deeper this story goes, goes, the harder it becomes to dismiss the pattern as coincidence. Because once questions started emerging about Hollywood relationships, another trail began attracting attention, the trail of friendships that allegedly collapsed under remarkably similar circumstances. And few examples generate more discussion than the story involving David and Victoria Beckham. At one point, the Beckhams appeared to be among Harry and Meghan's strongest supporters. They attended the royal wedding. Victoria reportedly offered assistance during important moments of Meghan's transition into royal life. The relationship looked genuine, strong, stable, yet, according to claims documented by investigators, tensions eventually erupted behind the scenes. Allegations surfaced, suspicions grew, accusations reportedly followed. What makes the story remarkable is not simply that the friendship deteriorated. Powerful friendships end all the time. What fascinates observers is the speed with which allies allegedly became outsiders. One moment there was trust, the next there was distance. And as more details emerged, many began asking whether this was an isolated incident or another example of a recurring pattern. Then comes an even more sensitive chapter involving former staff members, because unlike celebrity friendships, staff departures often leave a paper trail. Emails, reports, internal discussions, documentation, and one name continues appearing whenever these conversations resurface: Jason Knauf. Not an outsider, not a critic, not someone seeking publicity, an insider, a trusted figure working within the operation itself. His formal concerns would eventually become one of the most controversial episodes connected to Meghan's royal years. The significance of this story is not simply that allegations existed, it is that formal processes reportedly became involved. Questions moved beyond gossip and entered institutional territory. Suddenly, the discussion was no longer about media narratives. It was about workplace concerns, accountability, and whether certain rules applied equally to everyone involved. The investigation that followed remains largely hidden from public view, which only fuels more speculation. Because when conclusions stay sealed, curiosity grows stronger. Then the corporate world entered the picture. And unlike public relations campaigns, corporations tend to measure results with numbers, contracts, performance, revenue, deliverables. That is where the Spotify story exploded into public consciousness. A deal reportedly worth millions created enormous expectations. Industry executives anticipated groundbreaking content, major influence, long-term success. Yet the partnership ended abruptly, followed by criticism that echoed throughout Hollywood. The most damaging aspect was not the termination itself. Contracts end every day. What stunned observers was how openly certain executives expressed frustration afterward. Suddenly, private industry disappointment became public discussion. Suddenly, insiders who once remained silent were speaking candidly. And once that happened, other partnerships began attracting scrutiny as well. Netflix became another focal point. Huge expectations, massive headlines, tremendous financial investment. Yet over time, discussions shifted from excitement to questions. Questions about sustainability, questions about output, questions about long-term viability. And every new report seemed to reinforce the same concern. Was the brand generating the level of success originally promised? Meanwhile, another troubling statistic quietly accumulated in the background: staff departures. One departure can happen anywhere. Two departures can be coincidence. But when the number reportedly climbs year after year, people begin paying attention. Executives leave, communication specialists leave, advisors leave, leadership figures leave. Eventually, observers stop focusing on individual exits and start examining the environment itself. And that brings us back to the image that started this entire story: the crowded photographs, the carefully managed appearances, the contrast between image and reality. Because according to critics, that contradiction may explain everything. The public image continued projecting momentum even while warning signs allegedly multiplied behind the scenes. Today, the unanswered questions remain. Why did so many relationships reportedly follow similar trajectories? Why did major corporate partnerships end with such visible disappointment? Why did trusted insiders leave? Why do former friends continue to appear on opposite sides of the story? And perhaps most importantly, what information still remains hidden from public view? Because beneath every headline sits another question. Beneath every denial sits another mystery. Beneath every carefully controlled public appearance sits another layer waiting to be uncovered. uncovered. And if the investigators are correct, the story is not ending. It is only entering its most dangerous chapter. The allies are fewer, the scrutiny is greater, the protection appears weaker, and somewhere behind closed doors, people who know the full story may still be deciding whether to remain silent or finally speak. And if that happens, the headlines dominating today could end up looking like merely the opening act of a much larger scandal still waiting to explode.